Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from London. I'm Ollie Barrett and these are the headlines. British Prime Minister Liz Truss's speech at the Tory party conference is briefly disrupted by protesters. Moscow says it should be part of the probe into leaks on the Nord Stream gas pipelines after Sweden blocked off the area around the pipelines pending an investigation. The World Trade Organization dramatically lowers its global trade forecast for 2023 as Russia's war in Ukraine and other shocks take their toll on the global economy. Virgin Atlantic Airways pulls out of Hong Kong for good, cancelling flights and closing offices in the Asian financial hub, ending a 30-year history in the city. UK Prime Minister Liz Truss has delivered her crucial speech at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham. It came amid turmoil within her party and days after a major U-turn on the top rate of tax for the highest earners, which her government was set to abolish. Liz Truss's speech came with the warning, she says, that change brings disruption. Just minutes into her speech, it was disrupted by Greenpeace protesters. They waved a banner at the leader saying who voted for this before they were thrown out.
In these tough times, we need to step up. I'm determined to get Britain moving, to get us through the tempest and to put us on a stronger footing as a nation. I'm driven in this mission by my firm belief in the British people.
Well, referring directly to that U-turn on abolishing the top rate of tax, the Prime Minister said, again, she gets it and has listened, but she insisted she'd be sticking with the rest of her plan to boost economic growth. And she also said that those urging Ukraine to give up land for a peace deal with Russia should not be listened to. She insisted that Kiev can and will win the war in Ukraine. Well, for more, let's go to our correspondent Alex Isett with this report.
For many people listening to Liz Truss, it'll probably be the first time that they've heard our Prime Minister speak on all of her policies. And she got a really warm reception when she walked up to the audience, a round of applause, and a lot of people were ready to listen to what she had to say. Although she seemed quite relaxed and not really taken aback by the audience members. And even when there was a bit of a kerfuffle at the back as Greenpeace held up that banner and asked who voted for this, she just laughed it off and said she'd talk about the protesters later. We're seeing a very different Truss here than one we had seen at the beginning of the hustings. She does seem to be a bit more confident in herself. And in fact, some of her statements today did seem that she was really driving home that she is a strong-minded woman. And actually, for a few of her policies that she wanted to reiterate upon did make it sound like she was offering a crazy amount of promises. She's talking about changing the whole way the NHS works. She's talking about nuclear policy. She's talking about environmental changes. She's talking about economics. All of these things seem to suggest that in the long term, Britain will be a strong nation, one that it was many years ago, but didn't really give much of the detail about how we're going to go forward. She talks about militant unions, stopping protesters like the ones that attended today. But again, how exactly these will all be done.
Dr. Nigel Fletcher, political historian at King's College, joins me now live from London. Dr. Fletcher, what did you make of that speech? What was Liz Truss trying to achieve today?
Well, I think what she was trying to achieve was to effectively introduce herself to the electorate, really. I think she's had, because of circumstances, a very difficult time. Some of it self-inflicted, it has to be said, in terms of the mini-budget only 10 days or so ago. But also, I think she was very disadvantaged by the fact that one of the major things that she did on coming to office, the energy package, the huge amount of government spending that's involved, was hugely overshadowed when Her Majesty the Queen died, the very day that was being outlined in Parliament. So I think what she's been trying to do in this speech, and what the conference really should have been about, was about her having another opportunity to really introduce herself to the British public, many of whom will not have seen her before. And obviously she's in a very difficult situation given that where the opinion polls are. But I think that it was a fairly solid speech. I think in terms of laying out where she stands and what she believes in, I think it was quite effective. I don't think even her most ardent supporters would say that she's the best orator, best platform orator that there is. But certainly I think it was something that they will conclude was a solid speech, which certainly sort of said who she is.
And Dr. Fletcher, when those protesters were in the room, was that a moment that she was able in a way to bond with some of those Conservatives in the hall? Did she seem more confident after that, or did it rattle her?
Well, I think you might argue, how much did the Tories pay them to do that? Because I think it actually had quite a beneficial effect on her speech. She did seem to sort of come alive at that point. She was able to respond to it, and it certainly got the audience in the room behind her. So I think sometimes these unplanned interventions do sometimes have a positive effect on a speaker. And for someone who's perhaps not a natural platform speaker, it did allow her to loosen up a bit. And also she, I think, quite effectively said, she'll be coming to address those points later in her speech, and gave her an opportunity to say that. So not ideal, but I think we've seen some fairly disastrous conference speeches in the past. We think of Theresa May's speech in 2017, which was very painful to watch, and she struggled through that. This wasn't, I don't think, in that league. I think this was some noises off, which I think that allowed her a moment to be able to get the audience behind her, actually.
And where do you think this leaves her with her party? Because it's been really quite a messy party conference at times for Liz Truss and the Conservatives. Do you think this speech does anything to calm the nerves a little bit?
Well, I think she'll be hoping that it calms some nerves. I think certainly the leader's speech at the end of a conference like this is the point at which you expect to see the party rallying round and sort of putting a full stop at the end of what can sometimes be a turbulent conference. And these events include huge numbers of MPs and ministers going around speaking at different events. You expect there to be quite a bit of turmoil when there are disagreements. And going into this conference, of course, in a very difficult position, that was even more so. So yes, it has been, I think, a very turbulent conference. But I think the relief, I think, that she and her team will feel is that the cabinet and others are now no longer being pursued around the conference centre by journalists trying to get them to contradict each other. I think there's an opportunity now to say, well, she's made the speech. That's where she stands. They've had the U-turn that they had to make. She's said that they've listened on that, and I think she'll be trying now to sort of start again and try and go forward on the basis of how she's set it out. But I mean, it's been a very difficult conference. I think any conference that begins with opinion poll ratings, as we saw, is going to be difficult. And of course, the party was very spooked by that. And then we had the sort of collapse of sort of party discipline, which is never a good thing at any time, but particularly during a party conference. So, I mean, I think you could possibly say things can only get better. Maybe that would have been a better song for her to come on to. But I think, she's delivered what she will have considered, I think, a solid speech. And the hope will be that some of the the disunity and ill discipline that we've seen in the Conservative Party this week, that hopefully that will now be able to be contained somewhat in the future.
And just finally, in terms of the audience, Dr. Fletcher, that she was aiming at, I mean, there was a section in there on Ukraine which seemed to be aimed in no small part at Vladimir Putin.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we can sometimes forget when we're sort of considering the domestic politics of these things that there is a fairly grim world out there, that there is a very serious international situation still going on. And I think for Liz Truss, someone who's previously been Foreign Secretary and has been quite hawkish on Russia and supportive of Ukraine, I think that section of the speech got a standing ovation, and we would expect us to have seen that. I think she's making the point there that where Boris Johnson and his administration were seen as staunch allies of the Ukrainian people, that she wants to continue with that, and as you say, sending a very clear message to Vladimir Putin that she stands with Ukraine and with the sort of Western alliance in opposing what he's doing in Ukraine. And I think that's something which does put everything else really into perspective, and something which I think probably, now she's left the party conference and is heading back to Downing Street, I suspect will be taking up quite a bit of her time in the coming days and weeks.
Dr. Nigel Fletcher, thank you. Well, next to Ukraine, and Russian President Vladimir Putin has formalised the claimed annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions. He's signed legislation formally including those regions into Russia. They represent around 18% of Ukraine's territory. The 2 houses of Russia's parliament have already ratified the plan. Kiev and its Western allies say that Russia's attempted annexation is an illegal land grab and will never be recognised. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says his military has made rapid advances against Russian forces in the past week.
Сьогодні у нас є хороші новини із передової, із дипломатичного фронту. Перше. Українська армія здійснює на півдні нашої країни доволі швидкий і потужний рух в рамках поточної оборонної операції. Від російського псевдореферендуму звільнено вже десятки населених пунктів лише за цей тиждень. Це на Херсонщині, Харківщині, Луганщині і Донеччині разом. Зокрема, з військових зведень з Херсонщини звільнені від окупанта і стабілізовані населені пункти Любимівка, Хрещенівка, Золота Балка, Біляївка, Українка, Велика і Мала Олександрівки та Давидів-Брід. І це ще далеко не повний перелік. Наші воїни не зупиняються, і це лише питання часу, коли виженемо окупанта з усієї нашої землі.
Russian forces in the Donetsk and Kherson regions have dug in at new positions where they hope to halt the Ukrainian advance. According to reports, Russian forces are destroying their reserves of ammunition and bridges to slow the Ukrainian advance. It's also reported that in Kherson, withdrawing Russian forces are planting mines on infrastructure and in homes. The fighting in Ukraine has destroyed many of the country's power supply networks, triggering an energy crisis. Many Ukrainians therefore face a difficult and cold winter.
In an abandoned tower block damaged by Russian shelling in Ukraine's Kharkiv, Olga Kobzar plans to tough out winter for as long as she's able. The 70-year-old lives alone and has no electricity or water. She lights the gas stove in her kitchen for warmth. The temperature can fall to -4 Fahrenheit, that's -20 Celsius. Olga is the last remaining inhabitant of a tower block in the devastated Soltivka district, around 20 miles from the Russian border.
I plan to stay for as long as I can. It will be freezing cold and all that. I may stay longer with some friends, possibly. The only important thing is that my son comes back from the front line healthy and alive. I don't need anything else.
The 7-month-old war has wrought huge damage to the energy network and to residential areas in swathes of Ukraine. Officials fear Moscow could deliberately attack critical infrastructure when the frost sets in. They're urging people to stock up on everything from firewood to electric generators ahead of unpredictable disruptions. Residential areas in cities are centrally heated by power stations fueled by natural gas, but heating apartment blocks with smashed windows and walls is dangerous because the pipes could freeze and wreck the local system. Nearby, local priest Vyacheslav Koyan is boarding up broken windows for elderly neighbours so the heating can be turned on.
Most are worried. Many have left. There are literally about 5 people in each building section, mostly pensioners. I stayed and didn't leave because I can't leave my building and the pensioners. It wouldn't be right.
If there are disruptions to the heating system, electricity supplies will become vital. Many have purchased electric-powered heaters. But the electricity network could be overwhelmed if people use their own heating equipment en masse, experts say. Energy officials are declining to disclose detailed data about the state of infrastructure, citing wartime secrecy, and possibly so as not to stir panic. But in a rare disclosure on Saturday, energy officials said 2 power substations in an undisclosed southern location were, quote, completely destroyed by Russian attacks in late September.
34-year-old Ibrahim Traoré is the new self-declared leader of Burkina Faso. He overthrew the president Paul-Henri Damiba alongside a group of soldiers. Traoré has gone from being a career soldier to the leader of the West African nation.
It was not long ago that Ibrahim Traoré, a relatively low-ranking officer in Burkina Faso's military, was running an artillery regiment in a small northern town. Now, cheering crowds greet the self-declared leader after he and a group of soldiers overthrew President Paul-Henri Damiba. It was the West African country's second coup this year. But in an interview with Radio France International, Traoré insisted he will not be in charge for long. A national conference will appoint a new interim leader by the end of the year, he said, and an agreement with West Africa's regional bloc for a return to civilian rule by 2024 would be honoured. Still, an early picture of what Traoré's junta intends to do with its time in power has emerged. Burkina Faso's battle against groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State is likely to be a focus. Traoré is a career soldier who's fought on the front line against the militants. The insurgency has killed thousands, and it was anger over the escalating violence that fueled a coup in January, bringing Damiba to power. However, army officers who supported him quickly lost patience. Burkina Faso's new military leaders say Damiba refused to reform the army. Attacks worsened, including one just days before the coup, in which 11 soldiers were killed. As well as army reform, another option for Traoré is ties with new international partners, such as Russia. Russian flags have been waved in the street, and Russia has expressed support for the coup, just as Western powers were condemning it. The founder of Russian private military company Wagner Group has congratulated Traoré. Wagner operates in several African countries, including Burkina Faso's neighbour Mali, where it has been accused by human rights groups and locals of participating in the massacre of civilians. It has not responded to the accusations. Wagner's arrival in Mali last year spelled the end of France's decade-long mission against militants in the country. Ties between Burkina Faso and Russia could further strain relations with the former colonial power. In the aftermath of the coup, the French embassy in Ouagadougou was attacked by Traoré's supporters. Burkina Faso's junta had stoked the anti-French rioting, saying that France had sheltered Damiba at a military base. France denied this. Traoré, now on a crash course in diplomacy, downplayed the link between Damiba and France and called an end to the protests. But about ties to Russia, he was vague.
Now, French fries and onion rings are going high-tech in Southern California. Flippy 2, which is a robotic arm, is making fries, and some people are saying it's doing a better job than humans.
Meet Flippy 2. Flippy 2 is our AI-powered robotic fry station. It installs overnight and takes over the entire tasks of cooking fried food for restaurants.
Miso Robotics in Pasadena, California, has started rolling out its Flippy 2 robot, cutting the human out of a big chunk of the cooking process in fast food restaurants. Miso says the machine can cook several meals with different recipes, simultaneously removing the need for catering staff and speeding up the process at drive-thrus. Flippy 2's robotic arm, similar to those seen in car plants and manufacturing, is powered by cameras and artificial intelligence. It can do everything from taking frozen French fries, onion rings and other foods from the freezer to cooking them in oil before depositing them ready for serving. Mike Bell is CEO of Miso Robotics.
When an order comes in through the restaurant system, it automatically spits out the instructions to Flippy. It takes a frozen product, fries it for the precise amount of time, and puts the finished product in the end. It does it faster, more accurately, more reliably, and happier than most humans do it.
The original Flippy was designed to flip burgers, but after speaking to restaurants, Miso Robotics realised that there was more of a need around the frying station, particularly late at night.
It's the position that's often hardest to fill, it's hardest to retain, and so it really doesn't take anything away from restaurant workers. In reality, they're delighted to have the help so they can do other things.
Miso Robotics' 90 engineers are not only reimagining the food-making process, but also drinks.
This is Sippy. This is actually the inner workings of Sippy. Sippy will be able to take an order from a customer and put out a perfectly poured drink with a lid on it and a straw and all grouped together. What's happened is this technology is quickly caught up and is now solving these problems back of house very reliably. There'll be a point in time when humans will walk into a restaurant and look at a robot and thinking, yeah, remember in the old days when humans used to do that kind of thing? I mean, those days, it's coming. It's just a matter of...
The first European female commander on the International Space Station, Samantha Cristoforetti, was accompanied in space by a surprise guest. I'll leave you with that story. Thanks for watching.
Additional drink, Arab?